Hello and welcome to Radioactive Rationalists. Today I'll be reacting to a video by World Video Bible School which is titled 6 Proofs for God's Existence. If you want to see more videos like this, please do subscribe and turn on the notification bell because we will be making them. So without any further ado, let's get into the video.
Socrates once stated that we should follow the argument wherever it leads. When we look at the most profound question of life, does God exist? We should certainly follow his advice. When we do, we'll find evidences that show us God is real. Let's look at 6 proofs that show God exists.
You forego the idea of following where the evidence leads when you start your video with the conclusion. Reasonably, according to the scientific method, what you should have done was started with your hypothesis, i.e. God may exist, presented your evidence, and then finished with your conclusion. Also, if you had definitively proven that God exists, you'd have a Nobel Prize right now. But you don't.
Number 1, the universe must have a cause. The most fundamental law of science is the law of cause and effect. And it says that for every material effect we see, there is a cause that came before it or was simultaneous to it, and that is greater than it.
No, what you refer to isn't a scientific law at all. I'm assuming what you're referring to is what I've found on the internet is called the law of causation, and is a philosophical law and in no way, shape or form a scientific law.
The universe is a material effect. So what caused the universe? You see, if you don't believe in a creator, then you have to suggest something like a singularity.
It is in fact possible to say, I don't know, or there simply isn't enough evidence behind either hypothesis for me to wholeheartedly stand behind it. What you've done here is you've presented a false dichotomy, which is when a statement falsely implies an either-or situation, when there was at least one additional logically valid option.
That's what is popular today, that there was some type of singularity that exploded in something called the Big Bang. But then when you try to get down to the bottom of what's a singularity, well, what we hear from the scientific community that suggests to us, the cosmologists, they say, well, a singularity was something that popped into existence from nothing.
Again, no. It isn't the idea that something popped into existence from nothing. It's rather defined as the point at which something gains infinite value, which is why all it takes is a quick Google search to find out if you look it up. It is defined as, in mathematics and physics, the point at which something gains infinite value. This visual is incredibly misleading. The idea that the Big Bang was this sort of massive explosion spitting out fully formed planets, asteroids, in your case, is, I agree, an absurd idea. According to scientists, it is roughly estimated that 380,000 years after the Big Bang, atoms were formed. Also, in space, explosions are in fact impossible because space lacks the oxygen to fuel a fire, and space is a void and therefore the sound waves cannot travel through it. Therefore, no explosion. Rather just the rapid expansion of space-time. In fact, the Big Bang itself is defined as the beginning of space-time and energy, not matter.
Do you know that if there ever were a time when there was nothing, that's exactly what we would have now? The idea that something popped into existence from nothing is simply not a scientific idea.
No, it isn't.
You see, they're suggesting that that singularity is somehow natural, but it behaves supernaturally. They say that that singularity wouldn't have followed the laws of nature.
No, this isn't what science states or implies to any extent.
Well then, so what are we left with? We're left with the fact that the universe had a beginning, and it was not a natural cause. It was something above nature. It was something super nature, something supernatural. And so when we see the material effect of the universe, we can know that there was a supernatural creator that caused the universe.
This would be true if your premises were true, but they aren't. Also, with your logic, if God were accepted to be in this natural universe, then God would have had to have had a cause, and that would have had to have had a cause. This is an argument ad infinitum, essentially. Also, by your own definition, that cause would have had to have been greater than God, which would make God not the greatest being, which kind of contradicts your ideas. However, if God is, as you claim, supernatural, then God is A, unfalsifiable and therefore not a valid scientific hypothesis, and B, even if God did exist outside of this natural universe, anything he did in this natural universe would be grounded by the laws of this natural universe. Natural law is something I find to be something of a misnomer. In fact, it sort of gives the idea that because it's a law, there was some sort of inherent lawgiver. In fact, I think it's more useful to use the term cosmological constant, so that is something that has been true of the universe ever since the universe itself began.
Proof number 2. Design demands a designer.
I agree with the premise design demands a designer. But with what you say next, not so much.
It is a truism that everybody recognizes that this universe looks designed.
Incredibly, in 7 seconds you have said so much that is wrong. First of all, it is not a universally recognised truism, or a truism in any way, shape or form. Second of all, the way the universe looks is subjective, and therefore unfalsifiable, ergo is not a scientifically valid hypothesis. Also, I could argue subjectively that since the world is, well, asymmetrical and life has been all but wiped out 5 times on this planet, that maybe it isn't.
In fact, when we see the various different aspects of nature, and we see birds and squirrels and trees, and we see all of the things that they do so well, many times we as humans, we try to copy and mimic that design.
No, we notice things in nature which we think would be otherwise useful, and repurpose them for something which it wasn't originally intended for. This doesn't imply a designer, it just means we have the ability to recognize that some things are more useful in other scenarios.
But often we don't do nearly as well as the design that we see in nature. We look at the design of the human body and the human hand and the arm and the leg and the brain, and we see that those are some of the most advanced, technologically savvy pieces of equipment ever put together, and we try to mimic them and copy them, and we can't do it as well. Why? Because this universe exhibits design from the starry sky at night to the fingertips on your hand. The design is overwhelming. It's everywhere. Where does design originate? Well, what you and I both know is that when you see things that function and they're complex, that design comes from an intelligent designer.
Simply because something is complex, that does not make it designed. The human body is incredibly complex, but it didn't simply appear or come from the soil. It came to be over millions of years of evolution. And it wasn't in a perfect world. It was in a world which has had life all but wiped out on it on 5 occasions.
Big explosions just simply don't bring about order. They don't cause things that are functional and complex to come into existence.
You're right, explosions don't, but singularities can.
The design we see in the universe demands a supernatural, intelligent designer.
You have given no basis for your being here to be supernatural. Simply because we haven't explained it with science yet does not mean it's impossible to explain it with science. What you've done here is you presented a God of the Gaps fallacy, in which essentially you've said, well, this hasn't been explained by science, therefore, God.
Proof number 3. Life demands a supernatural life giver. You see, in the material world, we have come to understand that there is a law of biology called the law of biogenesis. Law of biogenesis simply says this, that in this material, natural world, life comes from previously existing life of its own kind.
This isn't a scientific law, it's actually a widely discredited theory.
Now, when we look at how people used to think about life, they said, no, life can arise spontaneously from non-living chemicals.
Here you're misleading people. You phrase it as though the idea of abiogenesis has been completely discredited, when in fact it could not be more to the contrary. In fact, since the Miller-Urey experiment, the idea of abiogenesis has given birth to an entire field of study known as prebiotic chemistry.
And yet every single biological experiment has shown us that that simply is biologically impossible.
Wrong. In fact, in 1952, scientists Stanley Miller and Harold Urey conducted an experiment simulating the early Earth atmosphere. After just 1 week of running the experiment, what had happened was their ocean had turned a brownish black. After careful analysis, it was revealed that through a series of complex reactions, many complex molecules had been formed. Among these were amino acids. The point of this experiment wasn't to create life, but rather just to prove the first step in Orpin's model. If you want to learn more about the Miller-Urey experiment, there will be a link in the description below for an excerpt from his paper and a video explaining it in more detail.
Life doesn't arise from non-living chemicals. From where did life arise? Where did life originate if it doesn't arise from non-living chemicals? You see, the idea that there's no God suggests to us that there had to be some singularity without a cause that exploded, and that explosion brought about design, which we've never, ever seen happen.
We haven't seen God create the universe either. What's your point? We have scientific reason to believe that the universe was caused by a singularity. What do you have?
And then, ultimately, somewhere the non-living chemicals gave rise to life. But that's biologically impossible.
No, it isn't.
Life demands a supernatural creator. Proof number 4. Moral law demands a moral law giver.
That depends on your view on moral law. As far as I'm concerned, it stands to reason that morality is subjective. There will be a link to Cosmic Skeptics video on that if you want to learn more about it in the description down below.
If some things are objectively morally right, and other things are objectively morally wrong, then there must be a God. You see, if we evolved from primordial slime over multiplied millions of years, at what point did objective moral values arise?
They didn't. And even though I consider morals subjective, I can't pinpoint one moment when morals just came to be. I believe that morals evolved with us. If you want to study more about this, I suggest you look up videos on ethology.
We don't look at a dog and say that that dog objectively, morally violated some rule when he steals a bone from another dog. We don't say, hey, he violated a objective moral value. We just don't say that.
No, we don't. Could it be that because instead of morality being gifted to humans and being objective, it could be subjective?
But we do say that humans can perpetrate things that are objectively morally wrong, that humans can be involved in things that are morally right. If that's true, there must be a God.
Humans do things that are legally wrong and are punished for it. There is no objective right or wrong. Otherwise, if you hurt someone, you should be punished. By your logic, even if it was in self-defense, you should be punished because, objectively speaking, hurting someone is wrong. See, as a moral code, it just doesn't really make sense. Even if morals were objective, it would give rise to the question, does God do things because they are morally right, which would imply that there was some other force greater than him deciding what morals were? Or are things right because God does them? In this case, well, then morals aren't objective at all. They are simply subjective to what God does.
Proof number 5, free will exists.
Not in the sense that you mean it, and I'll get round to that soon.
The atheistic idea that there is no God is founded on the idea of materialism, the idea that this material world is all that there is, all that there was, and all that there ever will be. Because of that, atheism has to suggest that you as a person don't really have free will, that there is no being inside of your body or brain that is super matter.
Okay, now you're just making stuff up. What the f*** is supermatter?
That really what's going on in your brain is just electrons bouncing around, and you're the product of those bounces, and you don't really make decisions on your own. It's just the physical laws and properties going on in your brain.
Now you're guessing it, yeah.
If you are watching this video of your own volition, then the fact of the matter is there has to be a God that can account for that free will that you as a person have.
That doesn't prove free will, but here's why I think that free will doesn't exist. Things we do in life, we do either because we are forced to do them or because we want to do them. If you're forced to do it, you don't have free will. If you want to do it, you don't have free will, and here's why. We don't choose what our wants are. For example, I want to go outside. All it takes is for you to ask, why do you want to go outside? I would probably answer something like, I need exercise, or I need to see my friends. You hear that word? It's very important. Need. Our wants are based on our needs. We don't decide our needs, our environment does. Ergo, free will doesn't exist.
There has to be a God if there is free will. And proof number 6, human reasoning. You see, we reason on a regular basis. We understand abstract ideas. If we were products of blind, chance, random processes over multiplied millions of years, reasoning and the laws of reasoning simply would have no explanation. And yet we reason together on a regular basis. From where does reason arise?
It derives from mathematical logic, and mathematical logic is just essentially how we understand the world. Humans have evolved in a way that we fear the unknown, and therefore the pursuit of knowledge is sort of ingrained in our biology.
It's got no naturalistic, atheistic explanation.
No, you just don't understand it.
Antony Flew, the atheist who wrote Theology and Falsification, the most popular atheistic paper for the last 100 years, the last century. In 2006, he co-wrote a book titled There Is a God: How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Became a Believer. He stated that his rule of life had always been to follow the evidence where it leads. And he said he followed that evidence. And it led him to the conclusion that there is a supernatural, intelligent God.
This is an appeal to authority, or argumentum ad verecundium. Essentially what you've said here is, well, someone famous changed their mind, so everyone else should. This is a horrible idea. You haven't actually presented any evidence here. If you are changing your mind, I really do hope that it is for another reason than someone else did it. So should I.
Let's let the evidence lead us to that same conclusion.
No, let's let it lead us where it leads us, and not let our conclusion be based on unsubstantiated facts. If you enjoyed this video and liked it, maybe consider subscribing or telling a friend. If you didn't like this video, well, then we will be making them, just don't watch them.